Sorry I'm late.
Okay, I will.
That's okay, we started without you.
Yeah, well, good. Everybody got an agenda that, yeah, okay. Well, thanks so much. All right, Councilmember Porterfield is on her way as well. And I know Deputy Chief Gilder is also on his way. We had a few questions for him, I know, non-agenda items here, or potentially agenda items. Let's just roll through these. Let's start with the first one. I know we've got some questions on that. RS 2023-2037, Roten, Syracuse, and Johnson appropriates $1 million from a certain account of the Community Safety Fund for a grant to the Urban League of Middle Tennessee.
So moved.
Second.
All right, thank you. Questions?
Yes. Could we hear just more about the grant and kind of the context around the award and that kind of thing? All the details.
Well, this grant is for the community, the group violence intervention. It's talking about, it's connected to all of the different violence that we see. But group violence is where we know who's actually committing the violence. This is actually set aside for that particular group of people who we know without a doubt. So about a year and a half ago, John Jay came down and spent some time with our law enforcement department, and they did a problem analysis. And they were able to help us see who were committing most of the crime. We're talking about 0.5% of the people in our population are about 500 people who are committing the crimes. And they're associated with groups, and some people call those groups gangs and what have you. This fund is basically to be set aside for a case manager to be able to provide case management services for that particular group. Now, it's not connected to cure violence or violence interrupters, but it's all one and the same because we're talking about violence. But because we know who these people are, we're going to put in place some things that we can do to help them and serve them better. In other words, it's a question, how can we help you help you? We got housing that we're going to have. But one of the things, the reason we needed to have those funds over there is because if we have a family in the group violence type of thing, that family may need to leave town. And it may be hard for us to advocate and have that money transferred or what have you. We may need to get that family just for that night so we can save a life. And that's kind of the reason that is being done over there. And the Urban League was a place that we felt that we could do it because they are working also in the community. And it's going to be connected to all the other things that we're doing as well with the village and what have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, for being here to add to that. I just want to add to it, having served on the Community Safety Committee and was a part of the discussion around this for Urban League. And I just want to also add that part of this money will be for grants. Actually, most of the money is for grants for organizations. Is that right, Ron?
Well, possibly, but
Okay.
for the most part, what we're trying to do is to be in a position to be able to provide the services that would be needed for those people who we know are the most violent. So we have that case manager person in place that's ready to hit the streets running. These guys are going to be known by their probation officers and basically kind of ordered to come to some of the call-ins that we will have to discuss what some of their needs are and what have you. So it's going to be a little bit more intentional, but the wraparound services that goes with that is the 400 or 500 grassroots nonprofits that will be providing some of those services and all of the other things that we've already done that would be just to help in that space for 2 years.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee. It's my first time saying that. But Ron, so this program is separate from Cure Violence and Violence Interruption, so there's no negative impact on the violence interruption pilot?
Not at all. Not at all. That's good. Okay. Yeah.
I find this very exciting, this focused approach. We know who most of the problem people are, and if we can find a way to reach out to them and kind of get them steered in the right direction, I think that's great. And I look forward to watching the progress.
Councilman.
2 questions, and there may not be answers for either one of these, but what certain account within the Community Safety Fund are we discussing here?
I can speak to it. So there was $2 million that was allocated in FY 2022, labeled as community safety, the city budget, which is separate from $1 million that was identified for cure violence the year before. So when we came into FY 2022, the budget, the city budget had $3 million for community safety. One is earmarked for the violence interruption, cure violence work. There's another $2 million that this would come from. So this would expend half of it as we're moving towards 2024.
Excellent, thank you. I did not actually expect that kind of an answer, and I appreciate it.
Mike, could you introduce yourself to the group? I don't know if everybody knows.
I'm Mike Lacey. I support Mr. Johnson in the Office of Community Safety, and I came with flyers too. So,
Pictures.
if I can approach the bench, if I don't.
I've never heard that before.
Thank you.
Can we get a Venn diagram?
Close to it.
Thank you, brother.
What this does, it lays out how separate each one of the things that we're doing, and that way you can see exactly where funds are going and how they will work together as far as the service, but they won't cross-sect when it comes to the funds that we're using for it.
Excellent, yeah, and this answers my second question, so thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? That answered all my questions as well. So please, yes, Councilmember.
Necessarily directed to this bill, but wondering if there's a status update on the Cure Violence pilot, if we know when or if that program will be moving forward, that pilot.
So we have a scheduled meeting next week on the 13th with Health and with MMPD to try and get to some clarity and answers to all of that. But we should know more come Monday the 13th, after Monday the 13th, yes.
So about the next meeting.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, seeing no other questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? You adopt. Thank you so much. RS 2023-2046, Roten, Syracuse, and Johnson amends the pay plan adopted for employees of the Metropolitan Departments of Police and Fire effective July 1, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Yes, Shannon, you can answer this. I don't, unless Commander Giller wanted to.
Yeah,
You want to tag team it? Go ahead.
I was going to say, this collection of resources is here to support the committee.
Sure. Would this committee like an explanation?
No.
No? No? All right. Go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, are there any questions? This is a legislative process. I will say, just from my perspective, amending a pay plan is something I don't take lightly.
Sure.
This is something, honestly, over months that MNPD and HR, in consultation with FOP, tried to work on the best way to incentivize officers to work in a very challenging area of town during very challenging hours at peak hours throughout the weekend. And this was what we think is probably the best collection of strategies. I will say that we took feedback from kind of all parties. We really pulled a number of things apart. We really do feel like this is the best and most equitable way to do it. Because it does require an amendment to the pay plan. I told Chief Drake, I said, I think it's worth amending the pay plan to do this. It's worth noting of the 46 officers, keep me honest here. 35.
So, real quick, so for those who were working budget and finance yesterday, just broadly, this is about
This is about a flat dollar amount of $12.50 a month.
for lower Broadway, right?
Yes, for the downtown entertainment district unit. These are going to be dedicated officers that will actually work Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 5 to 2-ish.
Somewhere, 4 to 3.
It's to 2 on Thursdays and Sundays till 4 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays.
And incentivizing, and I think it's worth, the reason why this is really kind of a co-shared component is, our job is to make sure that we have enough officers to service all of Nashville and Davidson County. Mandated overtime in the EDU is probably one of, if not the most cited reason for our current retention issues with officers. So it requires both of us. Our job is to recruit and retain so that we can service all of Davidson County and Nashville. That means a collection of strategies in the regular pay plan, and we also think this is the tool that's going to help plug that officers bid into that district. It's worth noting that the EDU district, I think, did start on February 1, so We have that dedicated unit now that's working without this pay, but we were feverishly working, and there's a legislative process, so we worked as fast as we could to come up with the right solution and get it through. So these officers are doing the work today without the $12.50 in February, and then our goal would be, with the approval of council tonight, that we can have this kind of retro to March 1, because they're in this pay period right now. That's our goal.
And one other aspect is, with it being an incentive, everybody was, during our rebid process where officers bid to their next assignments for the following year, they were given the opportunity to bid into this unit if they wanted to, so it wasn't, hand-picked people or anything like that to make it more equitable.
Can you introduce yourself to the group who were not at Budget and Finance yesterday?
Right. Seth Waltonball with Human Resources in the Police Department.
Great, thank you. Anything to add?
No, sir. I think they covered it.
All right, questions? Yes.
What's the average length of service for the people that are going to be staffing this?
So it was, like Seth said, it was done by rebid. This is the first year rebid. Just roughly looking at the numbers, it looked like it was our younger officers. But again, I think once the incentive is in place, then you're probably going to see people bidding there. But just like you know, we've incentivized pay for B detail, C detail. So I think you will see some people with a longer tenure choose to join the unit come rebid.
Does that go for supervisors too? They still pretty young?
I haven't seen the sergeant list. Lieutenants, what do you?
He's more recently promoted. I will say, with this group, because we've had a number of lateral hires in the past couple of years, that several of the new officers may be new to MNPD, but they have police experience from other departments that they're bringing. So they're not, 2 years. And
My only concern is I want to make sure we don't end up with something like occurred in Memphis just recently, where you got a bunch of young guys out there kind of running wild. I want to make sure that we're well supervised.
They are. They have a lieutenant and 5 sergeants for the 30 officers, so the ratio is appropriate.
I would just mention what I also like about this is that, frankly, we also, if we can keep officers in a dedicated unit, they're not tied to it for, their entirety of their career. It's, 1 year chunks and something that's going to work for their work-life balance. I think ultimately it's going to be a little bit of a cost avoidance of what we're doing now, and we're going to stop losing good officers that we could otherwise be keeping, so we have better longevity of service, and then more officers, frankly, in all the other 35 districts here in Davidson County, because we're pulling from your districts to fund, to have police presence down here, and we're hoping that even with the building of partnerships, you'll have a lot less of this, right? If you have a dedicated unit that's working with those business owners, establishing relationships, I think you're going to have really mitigate this kind of potential for a wild, wild west or, inappropriate decision-making. I think it's going to help to build better partnerships and probably what we have now.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All in favor?
Yep.
Against? Abstentions? Thank you very much. You adopt. RS 2023-2050, Rutherford, Syracuse, and Welsh approves a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to the Metro Board of Health to provide for the prevention, surveillance, diagnosis, and treatment of HIV/AIDS and to administer a Minority AIDS Initiative program.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Adopt. Thank you. 2023-2051, Rutherford, Syracuse, Hancock, and others approves a grant from the Friends of Metro Animal Care and Control to the Metropolitan Board of Health to provide funding for emergency medical care for shelter animals.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Or abstentions? All right. RS 2023-2053, Rutherford, Syracuse approves an application for a Justice for Families grant from the U.S. Department of Justice to the Office of Family Safety to improve the response of the civil and criminal justice systems for underserved communities while providing resources and training to court-based personnel.
So moved.
Second.
Questions? Comments? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? You adopt. Thank you. And finally, as far as an agenda item, and then we have one thing to ask Deputy Chief about. RS 2023-2054, Rutherford, Syracuse, and Hancock approves a high-intensity drug trafficking areas program grant from the Office of National Drug Control Policy to the Metro Nashville Police Department to provide additional funding to aid in the investigation of drug-related deaths.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Or abstentions? Thank you. You adopt. Okay, so this, I guess, could dovetail from the adoption of the amended pay plan. But Deputy Chief, Councilmember Evans and others have asked about the, what do you want to call it, special force of happening downtown, the Solar hires. Do you want to give some thoughts on that and how it does dovetail into the, the one that we just passed as well?
Sure. I know there was a news report last week about some extra duty employment that's occurring downtown. I want to make first clear that that's not related to the entertainment district unit. Those are our employees that bid to a shift, and that was what was being funded by overtime, and now is a dedicated shift, like you're working for North BDTEL or South CDTEL, you now work for the entertainment district unit. So that's two totally separate things. What the news report referred to was the NDMC, which is run by the Downtown Partnership, has obtained a proprietary security organization license, much like a church or a business that wants to employ off-duty law enforcement officers for security purposes. They obtained one for the Central Business Improvement District, and they have been employing off-duty law enforcement officers for that coverage area. And some of those officers, not a lot, I think it's been about 6 Metro officers that have regularly worked it since this all started late last year, that work in that coverage area. Largely their goal is to, ensure safety, and again, assist with if there's any issues that are occurring downtown, our officers are able to respond. I think some of the question that came up was about whether or not they were a private police force. They're not a police force. They, again, work for, it's no different than Kroger hiring an off-duty law enforcement officer, either a Metro officer or an officer from another jurisdiction to work as security for that area for which they have the PSO. We often get called to assist when off-duty law enforcement, whether that be downtown or in other areas, made an arrest. And if we respond to that, our officers are trained to make an independent assessment about whether or not there's probable cause that a crime was in fact committed. If there is, then we follow the law with respect to assisting in a prosecution. If there's not, then we're not going to assist. I'm happy to answer questions, but that's kind of the general overview of what is actually occurring.
Thank you. Councilmember?
Thank you for that information. I was able to talk to Tom Turner earlier today, and I mean, Tom, thank you for being here, but
Sure.
Some of the information that you shared with me was really helpful on the context side and the partnership's role in this, and would you be able to share some of those details?
Oh, sure, and I think it was well explained from that side of things. The Downtown Partnership manages the NDMC, which is the Nashville District Management Corporation, which was set up 20 years ago, and we've managed it since then, 22 years ago now, I guess. And that's primarily provide additional clean and safe service. There's some economic development, some image communications, but it's primarily clean and safe. And as we rolled through the process, let's say mid-COVID, coming out of COVID, we knew that there was a significant shortage of police nationally, locally, and downtown. And think about downtown, we have 12,000 hotel rooms, 1,500 VRBOs, and they don't stay to a room anymore. If you're on a bachelorette party, it's full. So if you're 90% occupancy, we have 40,000 people spend a night downtown in hotels. You've got 60,000 employees and 16,000 residents. You've got the busiest precinct by number, by far, of any in Davidson County. We have a significant lack of police officers, again, nationally, Nashville and downtown. So we wanted to work to supplement that in a way that was the most appropriate. We looked at contracting with Metro. We already heard about what overtime does if you're not interested in it. So if you have mandated overtime, then selecting overtime is just really not that popular. So we set up the PSO through the state and did that in the early part of 2022 and began forming what this would look like. We hired a company, Solar Risk Management, to oversee this for us. They have more expertise in it than we do. We also recently hired retired Metro precinct commander to oversee it for us as well, who works for us. And so in that process so in that process, we employ collectively through Solarian and the PSO employ about 12 FTE throughout the week. So somewhere around 450 to 480 hours a week is the goal. And that's from a early morning to evening shift type thing. It's not an overnight, it's not a late night. And it's providing that extra visibility within the improvement district downtown. And I think we've had great feedback from property owners and business owners. It's primarily funded through an increase in the sales tax downtown that was authorized by the state, 0.25%. So when you hear a property owner saying that they're paying for it, well, they are. They're paying additional taxes. Downtown has paid additional taxes for years, both in property and sales, and so for additional services. So that's kind of the background and kind of the layout of what's being done, and I'm happy to answer specific questions. I don't have the answer. I'll try to get it.
Just what's the overall responsibility of the team?
Well, it's really I think it's active visibility, and certainly if they see criminal activity, they are sworn police officers, and I have great faith in the police. Not saying that just because we have a retiree and a current. I mean, I do. I see them do great work all the time, and so in my view, they're doing their job. And if they because they are more present and more visible, and they're not responding to calls for service, which take up a significant amount of time for Metro, they're able to be very visible and friendly with merchants and employees and residents, I think in a way that makes them really effective. And so if they see something, they work on it like a police officer does. But there's no specific thing to be on this street at this time or, that sort of thing. But they do have a specific geographic boundary.
Yes, sir.
I often hear, well, we need police out in the neighborhoods. And I did read an article in the paper not too long ago where residents downtown back, I'll say 10, 15 years ago, was something like 3,000 or 4,000, and you just mentioned there's 16,000 actual residents, not tourists, but people living downtown now. It is a neighborhood. So we do have some police in the neighborhood.
There you go. And the 16 is on the way to 24, based on what's under construction today. And so it goes to 24 within about 24 months.
Yeah.
So changing quickly.
Just an observation.
Councilman?
Thank you. And so, I guess between the two of you, can you speak to kind of the nature between the public and the private side? And Tom and I talked about this together, but, some of the feedback that I've heard is really, out arresting homeless people like crazy. And I'm interested in, if there's an interaction with the security team, that's purely a private interaction. There's no connection to MNPD. From if somebody is arrested and it ends up being something that normally would have gone under like the community oversight board or something like that, it ends up being a private situation where my recourse might be, to sue a private company versus MNPD or Metro.
Well, I'm not sure I'm tracking your question.
Okay.
Other than, I guess I would circle back to kind of what I said earlier, which is even if there is, whether it be officers involved in, off-duty officers involved in this PSO, or they're working at a bar, inside a bar, or they're working at a Kroger. If we are involved, we're going to evaluate the basis for the detention and citizen's arrest and determine whether or not by law we can assist with that prosecution. So, obviously if if Metro officers are involved in that incident and we are on-duty law enforcement officers, then yeah, they have multiple sources of recourse, civil, file a complaint with the department, COB, so there are.
For somebody that didn't follow my question, you sure answered it exactly.
Okay,
what I was
all right.
looking for. So that's helpful. And then how, I mean, to the point, I guess, as far as communication to the folks that have been concerned about, homeless arrests, how can we know how many people that don't have an address or have an address at the mission or whatever have been arrested kind of during this time period that the force has been in place?
I can try and find some data on that. I mean, it would require me looking at addresses that were listed. Usually when individuals are unhoused, they list a certain handful of addresses. I can probably look at that for you. I will say that this group works closely with our Central Precinct Quality of Life team, which obviously their goal is to provide resources and outreach, and is not to arrest. So I know they do dovetail in with that group as well. But I can, if you just let me know the timeline that you're interested in,
Okay.
I'll certainly try and pull that data down for you.
Okay, and then I have one other question. So I'm sorry, the news story also referenced the Partners in Care, the mental health cooperative kind of engagement. And so those folks normally only work till like 8 o'clock or, have limited hours. And so for this initiative, has there been any kind of shift related to the hours of the clinicians that may be serving, the downtown community?
I don't think there's been a shift in the hours that they're working. I mean, I know they do look at that. Obviously, we're here. It's a matter of when we can get the clinicians to ride with our officers.
Yeah.
And I can also check and see if they've modified their hours since they've started the program within Central Precinct. But to my knowledge, I think they've been keeping about the same hours.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I had.
Good question.
Can I add just one?
Sure.
You mentioned on the kind of the outreach side of things. So we're adding an additional. We have 3 outreach workers now. We're adding an additional. So if a PSO officer is encountering someone who's homeless, then they're talking to an outreach worker as well. Now, obviously, there's great demand for outreach workers, and so that's why we're hiring another one, because they can't call MHID, which is Metro's team, and we've been doing Housing First outreach since 2011. So it's, we've rented apartments for years and gone, straight from homeless to apartment, and we've seen the success using Housing First as opposed to other models.
Thank you. Chief, there was a media report last week that said that out-of-town police officers would have arrest powers inside Davidson County. Is that accurate?
So, I mean, I can't speak to the jurisdiction of every agency that's involved, because I think some of them are state agencies, which probably have statewide jurisdiction. But I can tell you that, largely by code, there is not a large distinction between a citizen's arrest authority and a law enforcement officer's arrest authority, with some exceptions, one being civil liability, but the others are, things like being able to arrest for a domestic violence situation that didn't occur in your presence. Officers can, citizens can. DUIs, even if I didn't witness it, if it was within 4 hours and they're located, an officer can arrest, but a citizen can't. But by and large, if a misdemeanor occurs in someone's presence, a citizen or an officer, they have arrest authority. If it's a felony, and whether or not it occurred in their presence or not, they have arrest authority.
Okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Lastly, Shannon, as long as you're here, is there any update about?
Why do you think I stuck around?
Right. I had a feeling. Humana and Vandy.
Yes.
And just because there is sensitivity around it,
Sure.
I will say Vandy, but I really do mean VUMC.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's right.
That is
You're right.
very, very sensitive, especially for people working at Vandy. So there's a
absolutely right.
distinction. They've made a very big distinction.
Right.
So when I say Vandy, I do mean VUMC. Okay. So the last time I was here, I think part of our update was, we were concerned that the parties were having a hard time communicating. I am at least happy to report, at minimum, just from the beginning, that over the past 3 weeks, the parties have been diligently discussing and really facilitating conversations back and forth. They sat down in a room together. They have continued dialogue. Most of the information I'm receiving is from Humana because that's the contractual relationship with Metro. But I believe what they're telling us, and they're saying that there are ongoing negotiations and almost, if not daily, dialogue continuing on this. There was, as part of that daily dialogue, because April 1 was fast approaching, there are CMS requirements that require federal triggers for letters to go out that once a provider has left a network within 30 days, federal law says that they have to receive a notice from the insurance company saying, hey, they're going out of network. Well, both those parties are continuing to work pretty diligently, still working diligently, and you could tell that Vandy, which I get it, if those letters go out, everybody's going to feel it, right? It becomes a lot more real. Vandy agreed to a brief extension because the parties in good faith are continuing this dialogue to try to meet. So that got punted through April 15th. So now the new date of impact is April 16th. Those dialogues are continuing right now, but we did have a benefit board meeting this morning. And given that now April 16th is fast coming, we needed to start talking about if things didn't work out. But I want to tell you, not all hope is lost. That dialogue and negotiations are happening by both parties, and Humana, told us before, Vandy won't even talk to us, and then they're saying, no, there's daily dialogue, so I believe what they're telling us now. And there has been for several weeks by both parties. So the first option, which is just fully agreeing to a full network agreement, which is of course, the proposal we want the most, or agreeing to see their group advantage members, all of them, including Metro's population, on an out-of-network basis. Those are still heavy negotiations of those two, and I think there is still hope those parties are going to reach agreement before the new 30-day requirement happens, which will be next week. So I'm kind of hoping that we kind of know, just my personal opinion, which I probably shouldn't offer here, that we're going to know hopefully more about how these negotiations are going by the end of the week, but I don't know. The board then met this morning. We had to start talking about, I should say there's probably, just to give some context, Deloitte's our benefit consultant that works independently with Metro, right? Not with Humana, not with VUMC. We have been asking for the 2 months that we've known about this, hey, is this happening anywhere? Like this kind of disruption. Providers go in and out of network on a fairly regular basis, but is this kind of disruption happening anywhere? Because it feels quite different. And their national practice has said that this kind of disruption is not really happening anywhere. So it at least let us know that this was more unique than not. This kind of disruption is pretty rare. And so it kind of sets the context and stage for, there's not a good leading practices on options to solve for this. If nobody's facing this kind of disruption in this way, then hey, let's look at what some industry leading practices are or some options would be. So I preface all that to say we're in uncharted territory coming up with options, and then obviously within the confines of all the local, state, and federal laws we have to comply with. So we are looking at short and long-term options because the impact to members is short-term. We're kind of focused, the board was more focused today on this, but I think we absolutely, as a board, I'm a voting member of that board too, we're gonna need to kind of talk in the future, in the coming months, about long-term options of this agreement. Well, I think either way, if the agreement's reached, we need to make sure we can mitigate anything like this from happening again, which doesn't seem to be happening to other places. But the short-term ones, the board had a really robust discussion today. It was a 4-hour benefit board meeting. The majority of the meeting was on this topic, was on options, was on the Humana update. We heard from any retirees that wanted to come. We're very grateful to also have Councilmember Nash join us, so he can keep me honest or add his commentary of anything he thinks if I need any correction. The board had some pretty robust discussions on what we think the 4 kind of short-term options are from a legal helping people. And I want to manage the expectation that the 4 options are not awesome.
Right.
They are not good options. The board, with pretty heavy qualifiers, did make a motion today to recommend that the code be amended to allow for temporarily impacted retirees who are facing this disruption to be able to opt out even without proof of other coverage and preserve the right to re-enroll at a later date in case they wanted to roll back out of the Medicare Advantage plan with Metro. That would make them Medicare A and B primary. That alone would allow them to see Vandy, because Vandy is a Medicare provider and has to accept Medicare A and B. It would immediately allow them to do that. They would also then have the right, because of the loss of coverage, it will create a trigger for them to be able to go into the marketplace and get either a Medicare supplement, a Part D plan, another Medicare Advantage plan, either at 0 premium or at an increased premium for those of you that have navigated this for yourself or a family member that's not a Metro member. I've done that myself. So it allows that member, those that really have to see Vandy, another option. I think the board really contemplated like timing, how quickly this could happen, and it's not gonna be perfectly lined up because frankly, we didn't know that part of this was codified. But what I do expect and what I think on behalf of the board we would ask is this ordinance is hopefully going to be filed for consideration on first reading at your next meeting. If you would please expeditiously go through this process as you guys deem fit. I mean, I would hope that a quick 3 readings through a normal cadence, and then we are going to very quickly communicate to all impacted members that they would have what I will call a special disenrollment from us that will then trigger them and allow to go to the marketplace so that they could get Vandy, should they choose to do that. And then preserve.
Sorry.
Yes.
Don't you have to offer, if you offer one group of people an option out, don't you have to offer it to everyone? Isn't that a federal law?
What do you mean offer?
Well, you're giving them the option to opt out, which is a special exception. So don't you have to offer that to everybody, not just certain people that are impacted by certain things? So at that point, everybody would have to be offered that same thing. Otherwise, federally, you're gonna cause an issue. Right?
So everybody would have the option.
I thought you said just the people that were impacted by the.
Well, I say negative impact to try to right-size this issue, and I do not want to diminish the significance of the Vandy disruption. This does not impact 80% of our population. 80% of our population does not use Vandy today, and as much as I think we've all heard from some of those impacted members for which this is quite significant, how significant it is, you probably have just as many members that say, I love the Metro Medicare Advantage plan administered by Humana. A lot of people do like that. So so to answer your question, this is going to be crafted in a way we're not administratively checking, where anybody could do that. There are pros and cons, and again, I think the other options were also quite challenging as well. I think this was the fastest way to offer a choice out that we could get going. I think we still have to look for long-term strategies, no matter how this plays out, and I think what happens in the short term will impact how we are looking at long-term strategies. One big ask we do have, and it's qualified pretty heavily, I'm hoping it's part of the recitals in the ordinance, is Vandy and Humana are both important to one another, right? I mean, they are, Vandy is gonna lose business from people who have Humana, and Humana needs Vandy to be a provider. So whether or not this magical 4/15 date comes or not, I think just like any of this, if you've seen this periodically happen, they're going to continue to negotiate after those mandated letters go out next week. They're going to continue to negotiate pre and post 4/16. If at some point during the legislative process, and this was absolutely part of the motion by the board, the parties agree to a network agreement or seeing our members out of network, that we would want the bill withdrawn. Now, I don't want us to delay it either. Like, we need to move as fast as we can because these members are going to be minimally impacted for a period of time, more than we'd even want for it to be. So move as fast as you can on your 3 readings, right? Your 6-week time frame. But what we promise to do is continue to keep you fully apprised, us, mayor's office, et cetera, so that if a network agreement is reached, we can effectively stop that ordinance, have the network agreement, and then completely focus on the long-term strategies on how we mitigate this at any point in the future. And even when we've asked with other jurisdictions using Deloitte and others, it's very interesting to me, most of our peers have either gotten rid of retiree health care altogether or they've gone to a Medicare Advantage plan. And so, one of the questions we've had through this time has been, well, let's look at what our peers are doing. I mean, I said, we're not special. We are kind of later to the game than many of our city peers are. So I was like, have they mitigated this? Because I would like to know, like, what strategies are they using? And what was really interesting to me is there's a number of peers that do have either just one Medicare Advantage plan with one administrator or 2 Medicare Advantage plans. But what I found really interesting in the feedback that we got from Deloitte was in those peer cities that we were looking at that had the 2 Medicare Advantage plans, they had the same administrator, which would have forced the exact same issue. So I was like, I'm not a misery enjoys company kind of person, but I was like, wow, they haven't even mitigated that risk either. But I do think that one of the long-term strategies is, do we consider having 2 plans with 2 administrators? And if so, we want to make sure we're procuring that in an appropriate way, because as you guys probably know, we do have to procure all of our benefits, medical plans, dental plans, short-term, long-term disability, life insurance. They're subject to our procurement laws. So one of the things that we got to talk about, especially with our retirees today, was, we're boxed in certain ways. Like, we're not arbitrarily picking Humana, or we can't arbitrarily switch to another provider because we are also bound by those same procurement laws that apply to most of the services that we do here at Metro Government. So I know that's a lot, but I felt like there was a lot to share, and depending on what angle you're sitting at, it's a lot.
Sounds like you'll be back here on March 21st.
I think, or at least the first meeting in April, right? Because it'll go to committees. And I'm happy to give, especially since this could move and turn pretty quickly from here on out, it feels like, I'll be here whenever I need to be here. Did you guys reach out to me?
Well, with the 16th date, well, it's April 16th. Well, if you have something, please come back on the 21st.
Or sooner.
Yeah, or
I will be on the mountaintop.
Okay, fair enough.
If something happens, and you guys will hear about it first.
Any comments, questions? Okay. Thank you so much. We stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Committee meeting at May 5.
You need a whole another one?
That's right.